It's so sad that the boys are not friends. I cooked for them as young boys. Now, I don't know what's going on. I'm really glad Princess Diana's not here to see it.
So I don't know how staying silent.
For months, Meghan Markle appeared to be rebuilding everything the palace had taken from her freedom, influence, and control over her own story. But according to a royal biographer, one carefully planned Hollywood decision quietly crossed a line, triggering consequences neither Meghan nor Harry fully understood. Meghan stood between two worlds, and for a time, she seemed convinced she could command them both. On one side was the royal identity she had stepped away from, an identity still carrying prestige, fascination, and global power. On the other was Hollywood, offering independence, wealth, and the freedom to shape her own image. She believed she could use the influence of the first world to conquer the second without surrendering control to either. But behind the confidence was pressure. Every public appearance carried expectations. Every announcement was measured against previous promises. Every famous friendship invited questions about influence and ambition. Hollywood executives were watching to see whether Meghan could still attract a global audience, while palace advisors were reportedly watching something else: how closely she continued to connect her royal title to her commercial future. According to the biographer, the palace had not forgotten her. It had simply stopped responding openly. Its rules were older than any entertainment contract, and its grudges could survive for generations. The biographer's warning was clear. Meghan's most serious mistake was not an interview that went too far, a brand that failed to impress, or a public statement that caused outrage. It was a deliberate choice made privately, with advisors who believed her royal past needed to become more dramatic, more personal, and more profitable. Simply being known as the Duchess of Sussex was no longer enough. Meghan allegedly believed audiences wanted a stronger story, one filled with rejection, betrayal, hidden cruelty, and survival. She needed something capable of placing her back at the center of the global conversation. Harry, however, was becoming uneasy. He understood that some memories were not simply personal. They were tied to family history, inheritance, private promises, and wounds the monarchy considered untouchable. Yet Meghan's advisors reportedly saw those same memories as powerful material. Personal pain could become prestige, palace resistance could become publicity. Even anger could be reshaped into sympathy and commercial value. Meghan allegedly dismissed the earliest warnings. She had already survived public attacks and palace silence. Why should she fear another confrontation? But the danger was far greater than another royal scandal. The decision threatened unspoken boundaries over who owned the family's history and who had the right to profit from it. That was the contradiction Meghan could not escape. She wanted to prove the palace no longer controlled her, yet Hollywood still wanted the royal story she had carried out with her. And according to the biographer, senior royals stayed silent for a reason. They were waiting to see how far she would go before revealing that she had crossed a line she had never been told existed. And as Meghan's Hollywood advisors encouraged her to push further, Harry began to realize that the project was no longer simply about telling their story, it was moving dangerously close to secrets the palace had spent generations protecting. Behind the polished meetings and carefully leaked promises was a project designed to achieve something far greater than commercial success. Meghan allegedly believed it could restore her global authority, silence her critics, and prove the monarchy had underestimated her, but the plan depended on reopening wounds Harry wanted buried. After public setbacks and stalled ventures, Meghan reportedly saw the project as more than another Hollywood opportunity. It was a chance to take back control of a story that had increasingly been shaped by critics, commentators, and palace silence. Questions were growing about whether her royal connection still carried the same commercial force, and she allegedly believed this production could answer them all at once. The concept was intimate, dramatic, and dangerously recognizable. It would be inspired by life inside the monarchy without openly presenting itself as a royal confession. Names could be changed, timelines could be altered, confrontations could be fictionalized. But anyone familiar with palace tensions would know exactly who the characters were meant to represent. There could be a calculating future king, a distant royal wife, a jealous court, a frightened younger prince, and an outsider blamed for threatening an institution built on obedience. Meghan reportedly saw this as the perfect solution. Fiction would allow her to reveal emotional truths without sitting for another interview, while giving her room to deny that every scene reflected a real event. Harry was less certain. He supported Meghan's right to create, but the material carried echoes he could not ignore. Private arguments with William. Strained moments involving Catherine. Conversations about Charles. Memories of Queen Elizabeth II. And beneath them all, the unresolved pain connected to Princess Diana. Meghan's Hollywood circle allegedly praised the uncertainty. They believed audiences would spend months guessing which scenes were real, which characters represented specific royals, and which private moments had been hidden inside the drama. That mystery was not a weakness. It was the project's greatest commercial weapon. The palace understood the danger. A factual accusation could be denied, challenged, or buried under competing statements. A powerful fictional scene was different. Once viewers emotionally accepted it as truth, no official correction could fully erase the impression. Early industry interest reportedly strengthened Meghan's resolve. To her, the attention proved the world still wanted her version of royal life. Yet behind the excitement was a darker concern. Advisors had begun asking about unreleased letters, private family conversations, and memories never shared publicly. According to the biographer, that was where the mistake truly began. Meghan allegedly allowed those around her to believe such material could guide the story, even if it was never shown directly. Then came the meeting that changed everything. A specific creative direction was approved, and what had begun as personal storytelling suddenly appeared, in palace eyes, to be something far more dangerous, an attempt to turn private royal pain into public entertainment. But the danger was not hidden in the project's title, its casting, or even its portrayal of palace cruelty. The true threat emerged when Meghan allegedly decided which royal memory would become the emotional centerpiece. Harry had defended Meghan against newspapers, courtiers, relatives, and an institution he believed had failed them both. Yet this time, the warning came from him. He allegedly understood that one deeply personal subject could not be turned into entertainment without awakening anger that had never truly disappeared. When Harry finally understood the project's full direction, the unease became impossible to hide. Its emotional foundation was not merely inspired by royal tension. It reached directly into his childhood, his grief, and the private memories he carried of Princess Diana. Conversations about vulnerable women inside the monarchy, the pressure of public duty, and the pain of being watched were no longer background themes. They had become the heart of the story. For Harry, Diana was not simply royal history. She was his mother. Her legacy remained emotionally powerful, commercially valuable, and dangerously sensitive, especially in the fractured space between him and William. Harry allegedly warned Meghan that his brother would not view a fictionalized version of Diana's suffering as art. William would see it as a personal violation and perhaps the final blow to any hope of reconciliation. Meghan reportedly pushed back. Diana's life had already been examined by journalists, historians, filmmakers, and streaming productions. Her pain had been interpreted countless times by people who had never known her. Why, Meghan allegedly asked, should she remain silent when the loneliness, surveillance, rejection, and psychological pressure Diana faced seemed to reflect her own experience? That was the deeper divide. Harry saw Diana first as a mother whose suffering belonged to her sons. Meghan's advisors saw the parallels between Diana and Meghan as the project's strongest emotional weapon. They believed audiences would immediately understand the connection. The more intimate the story felt, the more powerful it would become. Harry was trapped between loyalty and guilt. Resisting Meghan could feel like abandoning her when she needed his support. Remaining silent could seem like betraying William and allowing their mother's memory to become part of a commercial campaign. According to the royal biographer, Harry asked for certain scenes, symbolic details, and references to be removed. Some elements were softened, others were disguised, but the central idea remained intact. More troubling still, Meghan's team allegedly interpreted Harry's discomfort as proof that they had discovered something explosive. If the material disturbed him so deeply, they reasoned, it would move viewers just as strongly. Before the conflict was settled, the project was reportedly discussed with influential Hollywood figures. The idea had escaped the privacy of Meghan and Harry's home. It was now circulating through rooms where secrets rarely remained secrets for long. And somewhere along that chain, the details traveled back to London. When the details finally reached royal ears, the palace did not see an ordinary television proposal, it saw an attempt to transform Diana's pain, Harry's trauma, and the monarchy's darkest wounds into Meghan's Hollywood comeback. The royal biographer's revelation was devastating. Meghan's greatest Hollywood mistake was allegedly approving a prestige drama that mirrored her royal life while using Princess Diana's private suffering as its emotional engine. It was the decision that united suspicious courtiers, angered William, and left Harry trapped between two families. The project was allegedly designed as fiction, but its meaning would have been impossible to miss. At its center stood a young royal husband unable to protect his outsider wife, a powerful institution accused of shaping public opinion, and an older heir willing to defend the crown at any cost. Names could be changed, titles removed, and events rearranged, yet the parallels would remain unmistakable. That was what made the decision more dangerous than another interview. A public accusation could be challenged within hours, statements could be issued, facts could be disputed. But a dramatic series worked differently. It could turn suspicion into emotion, and emotion into memory. Audiences might forget what had been officially denied, but they would remember the frightened prince, the isolated woman, and the cold institution closing around them. The most controversial figure was allegedly a maternal presence inspired by Diana. Her loneliness, death, and treatment by the establishment would hang over the heroine's journey, creating the terrifying suggestion that history might repeat itself. For William, this was reportedly unforgivable. Diana's suffering would no longer be discussed as family tragedy. It would become the emotional engine of Meghan's Hollywood reinvention and, in William's eyes, a weapon in a conflict that had already torn the brothers apart. Meghan allegedly believed the comparison was justified. She saw clear echoes between Diana's experience and her own. Surveillance, isolation, public judgment, and the feeling of being abandoned by the institution. To her, the project was not exploitation. It was art exposing a pattern the palace wanted hidden. Hollywood reportedly saw something else as well: global attention. The royal parallels could generate controversy, award speculation, endless debate, and renewed demand for Meghan's story. Even before filming began, the mystery surrounding the characters could become its most powerful advertisement. But palace advisors feared that private letters, family conversations, and Harry's memories had shaped the material. No direct quotation was required. A confidential moment could be altered, disguised, and placed inside fiction while still being recognized by those involved. That raised the deepest question of all: who owned Diana's legacy? Emotionally, it belonged to both sons. Neither Harry nor Meghan could claim exclusive control over it. By allowing Hollywood to package that pain, Meghan had entered a struggle larger than her career. Harry could see both sides and escape neither. Supporting Meghan risked deepening William's fury. Opposing her risked proving that royal loyalty would always come before their marriage. According to the biographer, the irreversible act was the pitch itself. Even if the project disappeared, powerful people had already heard the concept. The secret was no longer contained. Soon afterward, William allegedly sent a warning through private channels. Any attempt to commercialize Diana's memory would permanently change how Harry and Meghan were treated. The mistake had now been exposed, but the real shock was still ahead, because William's anger was not limited to the screen. It threatened Harry's place in Diana's legacy and Meghan's remaining connection to the royal family. William had tolerated interviews, accusations, documentaries, and years of public tension. But Diana was different. According to the biographer, Meghan's Hollywood plan crossed the one boundary he would never negotiate, forcing Harry to confront a terrifying possibility: he could lose access to the very legacy he believed connected him to his mother. William's response was not a public explosion. There was no furious statement and no dramatic confrontation that could give the project free publicity. Instead, the reaction allegedly moved through quieter channels: lawyers, senior advisors, and trusted intermediaries carrying a warning that was controlled, deliberate, and impossible to misunderstand. For William, Diana's memory was sacred territory. He had watched her life and death become the subject of books, films, interviews, theories, and commercial productions for decades. Each retelling took another piece of her story and reshaped it for strangers. Meghan's proposed drama, he reportedly believed, would go further by turning Diana into evidence in a battle she had never chosen. That was the painful irony dividing the brothers. Harry believed his mother's suffering was a warning that should never be silenced. William believed that same suffering should never be used to condemn surviving relatives or strengthen one side of a modern family war. Both men thought they were defending Diana, yet their methods were pulling them further apart. Then came the consequence Harry had feared. According to the biographer, he could be pushed away from future decisions involving Diana's commemorations, charitable legacy, private archives, personal belongings, and anniversary events. This was not simply about legal inheritance. The deeper punishment was emotional. Harry would always remain Diana's son, but he might no longer be trusted as a guardian of her private history. Meghan reportedly saw something darker in William's position. To her, the palace was behaving as though it owned Diana's story, deciding who could speak about her and which interpretation was acceptable. She suspected the objection was not only about protection, but control. Palace advisors allegedly began examining how Sussex titles, royal symbols, inherited objects, and family connections might be used in the production's promotion. Particular concerns surrounded a meaningful item linked to Diana: a piece of jewelry, a letter, a photograph, or a private memory that could be referenced without appearing directly. For Harry, the danger now reached beyond himself. Archie and Lilibet possessed royal titles, but titles alone could not guarantee belonging. Their connection to family history would depend on whether trust could ever be restored. William's warning reportedly offered no compromise: remove Diana from the project's foundation, or accept that certain doors would close permanently. Harry had demanded freedom from royal control for years. Now, he was facing its cruel price: the possibility that escaping the institution could also separate him from intimate pieces of his mother's legacy. But Meghan refused to retreat immediately. To surrender under pressure, she believed, would prove that the palace could still control her career from thousands of miles away. Yet while William guarded Diana's legacy, another threat was quietly developing inside Hollywood itself, because the executives who once saw Meghan's royal story as irresistible were beginning to fear the project carried more danger than profit. The palace issued no dramatic denial, no angry statement, and no public threat. That silence unsettled Hollywood more than outrage ever could. Suddenly, the executives who had praised Meghan's concept began asking whether the project might trigger legal challenges, royal retaliation, and a publicity storm impossible to control. At first, the appeal had seemed undeniable. A drama inspired by royal life and connected to Meghan promised instant attention. Controversy would travel across the world before a single episode appeared. But executives soon understood that public recognition did not guarantee legal or commercial safety. Lawyers reportedly began examining every detail. Changing names would not be enough if the characters, conversations, timelines, and private conflicts clearly pointed toward living members of the royal family. Fiction could offer creative protection, but it could not erase obvious connections. Then came the more dangerous question: where had the material originated? Executives allegedly wanted to know whether scenes were inspired by public reporting, Meghan's own experiences, Harry's confidential memories, or correspondence that had never been released. Each answer carried a different risk, and no one wanted to discover too late that a dramatic moment had been drawn from a private family exchange. The palace remained silent, and that silence felt strategic. By refusing to condemn the project, royal advisors allowed uncertainty to spread through Hollywood. Studios could not predict whether the monarchy would ignore the production, challenge it through legal channels, or quietly influence the elite relationships on which major projects depended. Respected actors, directors, producers, and investors began considering what involvement might cost them. A series accused of exploiting Diana's suffering could become more than controversial. It could damage careers. Meghan reportedly saw the hesitation as proof that royal pressure was already working. In her view, palace power rarely needed to appear publicly. It moved through private conversations, reputations, social circles, and the fear of losing future access. But the biographer raised another possibility. Perhaps Hollywood was simply unsure that audiences wanted another Sussex-centered royal story, particularly one built on familiar accusations without undeniable new evidence. Inside Meghan's team, the disagreement sharpened. Some advisors urged her to remove the Diana parallels and create a fully original outsider drama. Others warned that without Diana's shadow, the project would lose its emotional force. Harry quietly supported compromise. Meghan feared compromise would leave them with a cautious story that meant nothing. Then, the damaging phrase leaked. Meghan was allegedly trying to become the new Diana in Hollywood. The headline changed everything. The debate was no longer about cruelty, trauma, or institutional pressure. It became a question of ambition. Meghan, who believed the project would explain her suffering, was suddenly portrayed as calculated and willing to commercialize family grief. According to the biographer, the leak may have come from someone close to the project who had become alarmed by its direction. And once the leak escaped Hollywood's private rooms, Meghan no longer controlled the story because the public began asking the question she had feared most. Was this about exposing royal cruelty or replacing Diana in the cultural imagination? The project had been designed to unite Meghan and Harry around a shared account of survival. Instead, it began exposing the deepest difference between them. Meghan saw a final chance to reclaim her voice, while Harry saw his mother's memory becoming the battlefield that could destroy his marriage and brotherhood. Public opinion split almost immediately. Meghan's supporters argued that she had every right to turn her own experiences into art, especially after years of being spoken about by others. Her critics saw something far darker. To them, the project was another attempt to recycle royal pain, use Diana's name, and convert family trauma into commercial attention. What wounded Meghan most was that the debate was no longer about the story itself. It was about her motives. Every creative choice was judged through existing suspicions about her character. To one side, she was brave. To the other, calculating, there seemed to be no space in between. Harry became quieter. He understood why Meghan felt silenced. But he could no longer ignore what the project was doing to William, to his children's future, and to the private memories he still carried of Diana. According to the biographer, the tension finally broke during a private argument when Harry asked the question Meghan had been resisting: could the drama survive without his mother's shadow? Meghan allegedly answered that removing the parallels would surrender to the palace. It would force her to separate her suffering from the royal system that had shaped it. In her mind, that was exactly what the institution wanted. But beneath her anger was fear. Harry had once promised they would face royal pressure together. Now, when the consequences became personal, his loyalty appeared divided. Harry reportedly turned his frustration toward the Hollywood advisors surrounding them. They were encouraging Meghan to take risks they would never have to live with. If the project collapsed, executives could abandon it and move to something else. Harry and Meghan would still face William, the palace, and the damage passed down to their children. Their public image made the crisis even more dangerous. They had built their post-royal identity around unity, protection, and an unbreakable partnership. Any visible division could weaken everything. Some advisors proposed that Meghan continue without Harry's direct involvement. That might protect him legally and publicly, but it would also suggest that he did not support her story. Meghan was trapped by another contradiction. Her royal title had opened Hollywood doors, yet the same connection now seemed to limit what she could create. She was free from palace duty, but not from palace consequences. William still refused direct contact, while Diana remained central to the project. Then, Meghan allegedly began wondering whether the leak had come through someone Harry trusted. Harry denied betraying her, but he would not reveal every private conversation. His silence recreated the secrecy Meghan thought they had escaped. Now she faced a brutal choice: retreat and appear defeated, or continue and confirm the accusations closing around her. But the final decision would not be made by Meghan alone, because the palace had one last form of power, an unspoken consequence capable of reaching Harry, Meghan, and their children without a single public punishment. No titles were immediately removed. No official ban was announced. Yet the biographer claims the punishment was already taking shape in silence. Fewer invitations, colder intermediaries, restricted family trust, and a future in which Meghan's Hollywood ambition could permanently separate Harry and their children from royal history. The project did not collapse in one dramatic moment. It simply began losing oxygen. Legal concerns slowed discussions. Family pressure deepened Harry's hesitation. Disagreement inside Meghan's team weakened the original vision, while reputational fears made Hollywood partners increasingly cautious. The production remained possible, but its momentum had vanished. According to the biographer, Meghan's greatest mistake was not merely approving a controversial drama. It was underestimating what Diana represented. Her legacy connected commercial ambition to royal inheritance, private grief to public power, and two wounded brothers to an institution trained to protect itself at any cost. The palace chose exclusion instead of confrontation. Invitations could quietly disappear. Family updates could become less frequent. Future commemorations could be planned without meaningful Sussex involvement. There would be no official punishment to challenge, only a slow closing of doors. For Harry, that possibility carried a brutal weight. He had wanted to protect Meghan from the institution that shaped his childhood. Yet, he now feared his decisions had weakened Archie and Lilibet's connection to the family history he hoped to share with them. Titles could remain, but belonging could still be lost. Meghan refused to accept sole blame. In her view, the palace, the press, and Hollywood had all benefited from her royal story. Yet whenever she attempted to control that story herself, she was accused of exploitation. That was the central tragedy. Meghan had tried to prove she could survive without the monarchy But the crisis only revealed how deeply her public identity remained attached to it. William's silence became the strongest verdict. He did not need to condemn her publicly. His refusal to engage suggested the conflict had moved beyond anger into permanent distrust. Harry and Meghan still presented a united front, but the project had exposed two different meanings of loyalty. Meghan believed loyalty meant defending her truth. Harry believed it meant protecting his wife without surrendering his mother's memory. Hollywood's retreat also damaged more than one production. It raised a larger question. Could Meghan continue telling royal-adjacent stories without appearing dependent on the institution she had left? The biographer offered one final twist. The drama might return in altered form, stripped of obvious Diana parallels, but filled with references royal watchers would still recognize. And Meghan might not call that failure. She could see the backlash as proof that her story remained powerful enough to frighten both palace insiders and Hollywood executives. But the price was undeniable. A pitch meant to restore Meghan's influence had hardened William's position, deepened Harry's isolation, and turned Diana's memory into the final locked door between the Sussexes and the royal family. Because behind the glamorous promises of reinvention, Meghan discovered the one truth no Hollywood contract could change. Once royal history becomes personal currency, the palace never forgets who spent it, and the consequences can outlive the headlines.